Okay, so before I get started, first things first is that this is going to contain spoilers, so you have been warned. Alright, so The Last of Us is a game that is set 20 years after an outbreak of an unknown infection. Most of the game, the player controls Joel, a man tasked with smuggling a little girl named Ellie who just might be carrying the cure to an infection in exchange for an arsenal of guns. What I aim to do throughout this is talk about some of the characters and how I think they relate to the overall story, and at the end offer some of my own opinions on the game. Now, at the end of the game, Joel kills Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies, in order to save Ellie from being sacrificed for the good of mankind. The two main thoughts of this are that Joel was either being selfish because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or that Joel was being selfless because good can never come from an act of evil. So what do we know about Joel? His daughter Sarah was killed during the outbreak. He had a major disagreement with his younger brother Tommy. He's coexisted in the world with the infection for 20 years. So what does this tell us about Joel? Well, not much. But one of the things mentioned in the game is that Joel wanted to be a singer. This could potentially tell us something about Joel's character. It does not explain why he didn't become a singer, but I think a fair assumption would be that it is either because he had Sarah when he was quite young and his priorities changed, or the outbreak happened and his priorities changed. The common denominator being priorities. So we can say that Joel is a man who understands what is truly important and prioritizes accordingly. A theory that I read was that the story is that of acceptance versus denial, and that ultimately Joel accepts his daughter's loss rather than continuing to deny himself to even think about it, and in the end his choosing to save Ellie is an acceptance of the world that he lives in. I think there is some truth to this, especially if we look at it from a religious point of view, where no matter the potential outcome, it is never okay to commit or permit an atrocity, in this case killing Ellie. However, I don't think that tells it completely, and I'm not convinced that Joel is the good guy dealing with a tough situation. One of the things that stands out for me is, why did he want the guns in the first place? It's 20 years later, he's living inside a quarantine zone, perhaps not happy as food is scarce and living conditions are very restrictive, but it's a situation that is working. So what was the disagreement that Joel and Tess had with Robert? Why was it so important that they had guns they were willing to risk their lives smuggling a young girl out of the city without even knowing why? Seems that Joel and Tess have both partaken in illegal activities. Furthermore, at the end, when Ellie asks what happened as they drove away from the Fireflies laboratory, Joel lies to her and lies again when Ellie asks for confirmation. A person who has accepted his life shouldn't feel the need to lie about their actions. As far as acceptance versus denial goes, I think Joel may have accepted some things, but is still in denial about others, namely the justification of his own actions. I don't think it is unreasonable to assume that more attention to detail went into Ellie's character than anyone else's in the game. When she is introduced, she comes across as some potty-mouthed little brat, though as the story progresses, her character develops and the player learns more about her history. Turns out she just might be carrying the cure to an infection when it was discovered she is immune to it. For me, the most interesting parts to Ellie were not strictly speaking related to the story. It was little things like making playful noises with herself, attempting and failing to whistle, playing with her lips. These and some others go a long way to creating a person and not just a character that you're lumbered with in a video game. It's easy to care about Ellie and getting her to the Fireflies, and because of that, it's easy to understand Joel's decision to save her at the expense of mankind. Though I'd be reluctant to say that Ellie is completely innocent in all this. When they were stopped by the soldiers, it was Ellie who attacked first, forcing Joel and Tess to kill. Because of that, I appreciate this next statement is purely speculative, but had the soldiers seen she was infected but immune, is it unreasonable to think that they may have wanted to help? Based on what happened to Joel's daughter, the answer is a definite no. But this is 20 years later, different world, different people, and Naughty Dog have done an excellent job of giving even the minor characters some character. For example, when Joel goes after Robert, he overhears one of Robert's men saying his cousin is in the Fireflies, bearing in mind that Robert and the Fireflies aren't on good terms. So going back to the soldiers, what was their story? What did they think of the world they're in? What did they want from life? Well, we'll never know thanks to Ellie. It's hard to say if anyone in this game is a good guy, at least not in the traditional sense. The overall theme is survival, different factions and people choose different means of survival. Does this make one more morally correct than the other? Every group or person Joel comes across in the game all have an element of selfishness. Even Henry, who helps Joel along the way, makes it clear through words and actions he is not willing to risk his brother's life. This kind of selfishness is understandable, and one can also draw parallels to Joel's later choices. Henry could either do the right thing by helping Joel, or he can do the right thing by making sure his brother is safe. The other way to look at it is Henry can leave Joel to fend for himself, or he can put his brother's life in danger. So what facets should one consider when deciding whose life is more important? I also wouldn't be too quick to say Tommy and Maria's people are the good guys. They've built a community which functions. They seemingly just keep themselves to themselves and are ready to defend themselves should they need to. This per se is quite noble, but consider that they have arms, they have numbers, yet they don't do anything about the problem at large. They seem happy to let the rest of the world rot just as long as they're safe. Furthermore, although there is no reference of implication of this, so again this next part is purely speculative, but apart from Maria, I didn't spot any other women in the group, which makes me wonder what happens next. What happens when the men die and their numbers dwindle? What happens if Maria dies? I wouldn't be too surprised if it were that the hunters were at one time just like Tommy and Maria, but through years of lack of food, lack of women, they resorted to cannibalism and possibly, perhaps I'm reading too much into this, but possibly sexual deviancy.
Convince them of what?
That you can come around. You have heart. You're loyal. And you're special.
Oh.
However, with the hunters, I do think that it is impossible to say they're the bad guys without agreeing that the government are the good guys. The hunters have chosen to live outside their designated quarantine zones. This means they could have food, albeit in rations. They could live safely away from the infected, but it would mean living within the highly restrictive rules of the government and giving up most of their freedoms. So if we say the government are the bad guys, we'd have to agree that the hunters are the good guys, since their way of life is a complete contrast. Also consider that the Greek philosopher Diogenes stated that wisdom and happiness belongs to those that reject society. If this philosophy is true, clearly the hunters have rejected society. Not much is known about the Fireflies. They're either terrorists or freedom fighters, depending on which side of the fence you sit on, not unlike real-life terrorist freedom fighters. What is known is that the leader Marlene tasked Joel and Tess with smuggling Ellie out of the city without telling them why, just promised them guns in exchange. We also know that Marlene knew Ellie since birth and struggled with the decision over her life. As much as she wants to protect Ellie, I think her decision is understandable, when one death can lead to the cure for millions of people, if not billions of people. And if television shows like 24 are to be believed, then this is just how most governments make decisions, by most amounts of lives saved or minimum amounts of lives lost. But it is still a lot to sacrifice for something that in actuality may not work. Now I'm going to contradict myself somewhat. Previously I have used the term cure in reference to Ellie's immunity. This is because it seems to be the common perception. However, even if it works, it wouldn't be a cure. Marlene says they engineered a vaccine. The problem is that in common speech, the words vaccine and medicine are often used interchangeably. However, there is a difference. A medicine cures an illness, a vaccine prevents an illness. So it wouldn't turn the infected back into humans, it would just stop humans from becoming infected, which is still worthwhile. But how would you test its effectiveness without sacrificing more people? Although Ellie can't be infected, she can still be killed, just as anyone who has to test a vaccine could still be killed. So are they really saving mankind? Throughout all this though, one thing I don't think has been considered and potentially puts both Joel and Marlene in the wrong. Marlene tries to justify her decision to Joel by saying it's what Ellie would have wanted. This type of sentence is usually said when the person in question has died, but Ellie wasn't dead, she was just unconscious. Now, there's no mention of any specific time frame in which the vaccine had to be manufactured. Therefore, what was stopping them from asking Ellie herself? They could have waited until she regained consciousness, explained the situation. All involved members could provide their inputs and come to a decision together. Instead, both Joel and Marlene made a call on someone else's life without consulting them about it. After all Ellie had been through, shouldn't she have a say in how it all ends? Taking all this into consideration, the end result is that the game is absolutely brilliant. The level of detail in the characters, the story, the environment is immense. From the dialogue, the action sequences, I really think Naughty Dog nailed it.
How you doing, baby brother?
God damn.
Yeah.
Let me look at you.
However, upon further inspection, there are a few parts which I'm not entirely sure about. One of them is the fact that when playing as Joel, enemies won't see Ellie or any other companion running around in front of them as long as Joel is in cover. On one hand, I welcome this because games that penalise you on the NPCs being idiots are really frustrating. On the other hand, it looks ridiculous and really distracts away from the ambience. Furthermore, the enemies themselves, for the most part, don't seem that perceptive. Another part that I wasn't sure about is when Ellie, during a cutscene, tells Joel in reference to people she cared about either dying or leaving her.
Everyone fucking except for you!
The problem here is that it is poor sentence structure and the expletive was too forced. That being said, at this point in the game, Ellie is supposed to be frustrated, and it could be that they were trying to emphasize that grammar wasn't at the forefront of her mind. Considering the rest of the game and all the detail that went into it, this could very well be the case, but I'm not convinced of that. It stands out unnecessarily, and I think it would have been better served had she just said, everyone except for you. Maybe if someone from Naughty Dog who works on the game sees this, they can shed some light on that matter. But these are minor points and do not in any way break the game, and in the end you're still left with a piece of art that is leaps and bounds above most comparable forms of electronic entertainment.